O'Connell. He's from several generations of the Disciples of Christ ministers. As a Unitarian Universalist minister, Daniel served the churches in Danbury, Connecticut, St. Louis, Missouri, and Houston, Texas. He served our various regional and national denomination boards with distinction. Especially notable in his 20-plus year career in the ministry, he performed the first Midwest public gay wedding in 2003, and he filed the ceremony with the St. Louis city clerk. In Houston, he merged one of the two strong and weak churches into one church in 3 locations. He also co-founded the UU Voice for Justice, a rapid response social justice network. Please welcome Reverend O'Connell.
Good morning. Welcome back. 20 years, 15 years, it's a long time. Highways might look a little different. I don't know. I'm loving the theme because it makes you think about things that maybe you wouldn't ordinarily have thought of. So Mary Case mentioned the beloved community, and then looking that up and finding out it was from Dr. King. And then we've got this quote from Clarissa Pinkola Estes. Ours is not the task of fixing the entire world all at once, but of stretching out to mend the part of the world that is within our reach. Sometimes things don't go, after all, from bad to worse. Some years, the crops don't fail. Sometimes you aim high and all goes well. A people will sometimes step back from war, elect an honest person, decide they care enough that they can't leave some stranger poor and hungry. Some people do become what they are born for. That's from Sheena Pugh. Sometimes our best intentions do not go amiss. Sometimes we do as we meant to. The sun will sometimes melt a field of sorrow that seemed hard frozen. May it happen for you. Our theme is justice and equity. It comes from the second Unitarian Universalist principle. But who calls us to justice, to equity? The prophets, which is conveniently the second source of Unitarian Universalism. Words and deeds of prophetic people which challenge us, this is the key, tough part, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. Sounds pretty good. And there have never been a lack of prophets. You know, they can contradict each other. They can say different things, and we can be kind of left not knowing which way to go. And as you know, we are in an election year. Hoo boy. And I'm sure we're all completely satisfied with the myriad choices that we have. And there are hundreds of prophets and pundits telling us over and over again what to do, who to vote for, and most importantly, who we should be scared of. This is nothing new. But how do a thoughtful, progressive religious people figure out, kind of on their own, which prophets to follow? How do you tell the false prophet from the true? Sometimes it seems pretty easy. Other times, I don't know. So there's this story of a Hebrew prophet. I can pretty much guarantee you've never heard of this particular guy. And it helps me when I think about how to kind of distinguish between the true and the false prophets. So there's these two Hebrew kings, and they're thinking of attacking a third country in order for one of them to get back the land that they used to own, because, that's worth killing for, right? So to help them decide, they decide to call together a whole group of prophets, and hopefully the prophets will tell them or not whether or not going to war against this third country is the right thing to do. And the way they do that is they want to get to know God's will, and supposedly the prophets know God's will, but they want to be on the safe side, so they don't want to just have one prophet. So, and then this is from Kings 22 in Hebrew Bible. You can follow along. I'm sure there's one under your chair someplace. Then the northern king gathered the prophets together, about 400 of them. 400. There's no sound system, right? And they said to them, "Shall I go to battle against Ramoth Gilead, or shall I refrain?" And they said, "Go up, for the Lord will give it unto the hand of the king." The southern king, who had a little bit more at stake here, said, "Well, is there no other prophet of the Lord to whom we may inquire?" The southern king wants to be sure. So he asks if there are any more prophets. And then the northern king says, "Well, there is still one other of whom we may inquire, Micaiah, son of Imlah, but I hate him. For he never prophesies anything favorable about me, only disaster." Still, the northern king calls for the prophet he doesn't like. In the meantime, let's set the stage here. These two kings are sitting on thrones, and they're arrayed in their robes. They're at the threshing floor at the entrance of the gate of Samaria, and all these prophets are prophesying before them. So the threshing floor is this huge area immediately outside the gates of the city. And remember, we have 400 prophets, all prophesying, all at the same time, carrying on, wearing their arms around. Some are dancing, some are wearing masks, some are muttering themselves, others are screaming at the top of their lungs. 400 prophets, all at the same time, walking, running, dancing, total chaos. Basically, they are putting on a pep show for the coming war, which everybody assumes is going to happen. Finally, the king gets them to settle down a little bit. And next, Zedekiah, son of Chenaanah, made for himself horns of iron, and he said, "Thus says the Lord, with these you shall gore the Arameans until they are destroyed." And they're just whipping themselves up into a frenzy. And they're all saying the same thing. "Go to Ramoth Gilead and triumph. The Lord will give you this land." And at this point in the story, the messenger comes back with Micaiah, son of Imlah, whom you remember the king hates. The messenger tries to get Micaiah to go along with the crowd, and we have to assume this was not easy. Apparently, Micaiah tried anyway. The northern king said to him, "Micaiah, shall we go to Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall we refrain?" Micaiah answered him, "Go up, triumph. The Lord will give it into the hand of the king." The king said to him, "How many times must I make you swear to tell me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord?" Now, when the kings are speaking, especially when they sound angry, everybody gets quiet. And then Micaiah said, "I saw all Israel scattered on the mountains like sheep that have no shepherd, and the Lord said, 'These have no master, let each one go home in peace.'" So 400 prophets are prophesying victory in battle, but Micaiah is prophesying death and scattering. Clearly, only one answer is right. Well, what about these other 400 prophets? Well, Micaiah says, well, they have a lying spirit put in their mouths to entice the kings to disaster, and they're all lying. All these other 400, I'm the right prophet. These other 400, they're all wrong. They're all lying. Thus says the Lord. Now, King Ahab, the northern king, is very upset. He tells his servant, "Thus says the king." You know this is not going to be good when the king starts out, "Thus says the king. Put this fellow in prison, feed him on reduced rations of bread and water until I come back in peace." And Micaiah said, "If you return in peace, the Lord has not spoken by me." Okay, the line has been drawn. Basically, Micaiah tells King Ahab that the king will die in battle. And even though he prophesies this, as we will see, correctly, all he gets for his trouble is a prison cell where he will die knowing the king won't make it back. The northern king disguised himself so he wouldn't look like a king, and all the king's horses and all the king's men, they went into battle, but a stray arrow hits the king anyway, and right about sunset, a shout went through the army, every man to his city and every man to his country, and that's the end of the story. Poor Micaiah ben Imlah, he tells the truth, knowing it's not going to turn out well for him, but he tells the truth anyway, and he gets life in prison for his troubles. There he is in the Hebrew Bible forever. The other 400 prophets, we'll never know their names. So there's a lesson here. There's a kind of couple different ways to find out if it was a true prophet or a false prophet. Number one, did their prediction come true? If it did not come true, there's really no point in putting it there. Now, was the prophecy critical of the status quo? Because if it just praises the current situation, there's no reason to put it in there. And then here's the tough one. Does the prophecy point to our collective responsibility in bringing about the critical situation? You know, it's one thing for some kings to fight over land. It's an entirely another matter if you and I are going to be accused of injustice by our actions or our inactions. Hey, you're getting a little close there. I can listen to a prophet decry justice. I can listen when they point out the consequences if nothing is done. I do not want to hear about how I personally am part of an injustice. But maybe, like a Hebrew king, we are called to listen to what we don't like anyway, in order to figure out if there's some truth in it. Do not quench the spirit. Do not treat prophecies with contempt, but test them all. Hold on to what is good. Reject every kind of evil. But still, it is really tempting to just ignore the modern day prophets. Ignore the reproductive justice activist who points to laws being passed denying women's rights to their own body. Ignore the climate activist who points to our overconsumptive lifestyles. Ignore the soup kitchen prophet who reminds us, though, that there be food to feed all, for many there is no food within reach. We may nod our heads in resignation with the prophet's description, go, oh yeah, that's tough. That's sad. I'm going to light a candle for that. That is tough. As if we are not part of the problem. If a prophet points out that right now, at this very moment, 70% of the world's cocoa used in all our chocolate comes from two African countries, Ghana and the Ivory Coast. And that they are known and have been known for years for using children to harvest the cocoa that goes into our chocolate. Well, what does it mean? Some of those 2 million children are as young as 5, and some are treated as slaves. Easter is next month. It's the end of March. What if a prophet points out that we are paying for Brazilian and African child slavery in order for us to enjoy our Easter chocolate, the chocolate that we are using to bake holiday goodies for others to show how we care about them? Now, these kids, they are predominantly brown-skinned, with dark hair, brown eyes, definitely poor, skinny, not much in the way of shoes. In other words, they probably looked a lot like a young Jesus. I don't want to believe it. I don't want to believe it. But you do a search, not right now, but you do a search, you at home, you can do this. Do a search on slavery in the chocolate industry. Here's what pops up right away. Was your chocolate produced using child slave labor? Or, another blog post, the 1.5 million child slaves behind your chocolate bar. Major chocolate brands using child and slave labor. List here. And on and on and on. And my first reaction was, this must be something that's somebody's making up. This must be a false prophet. This must be fake news. Because when the prophet holds up a mirror to us, so that we see through a glass darkly and undeniably the difference between who we say we are and how we are behaving, it can get us hot. We will be tempted to shout, "No, put that prophet in jail. Surely a lying spirit is in his mouth. Feed him on reduced rations until he comes to his senses." Or maybe just a tiny bit of effort, we can buy chocolate from cocoa not harvested by small children in dangerous conditions. I did the homework for you. This is going to be easy to remember. One of these brands is called Divine, Divine. It shares profits with the women farmers. It's fair trade, organic. You can get it at your grocery store, and sure, it costs a little more, but not that much more. I'll take the non-slave chocolate for $2 extra, please. Now, if you believe something like this is important, and it doesn't have to be chocolate, you can make a change to your actions. When you change your actions, people around you can notice, and when they notice, the effect can spread. And I'm not just talking about chocolate here. The transforming power of belief, your belief, leads to your prophetic action. And it can be contagious. It can drive social justice movements. It can push humanity through a one-way door. When women and men in the late 1800s began to advocate for women's right to vote and participation in politics, at first people thought, well, that's never going to happen. But then enough people got involved, and it did happen, and then people stopped doubting, and then it was like, well, women have always had the right to vote in this country. I mean, that's what my children think. Until they went to high school and learned something, I guess. Now, when Dr. King and others led the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, it was their transforming power of belief in nonviolent protest and civil disobedience. It spread from their little inner circle to people who thought, well, that can't possibly work. But it did, and it was spread to the rest of the country, which began to dismantle segregation. When the gay rights movement caught worldwide attention in the 1980s, things began to happen. 30 years of continuous effort. And then, in 2015, and it seemed pretty sudden at the time, in 2015, same-sex marriage became the law of the land. And at some point, I hope to have grandchildren, and those grandchildren are going to say, we've always had gay marriage. Because in their lifetime, that will be true. You and I, through our action or inaction, hopefully through thoughtful, transforming belief that move us to act for justice, to bring about equity, one day, you and I and everybody in this room will be gone. Now is the time to act. And it doesn't have to be big, as we heard, as it's printed in your order of service, that quote from Estes. It just has to be something. Women's suffrage, civil rights movement, individuals push past their doubt through activity and attitude, through the transforming power of their belief. The world was inspired, the world changed, a bell of freedom was rung, and it cannot, will not be unrung. Its faint sound is still there, if we listen. Prophetic words and deeds did not stop there, and it does not stop now. The transforming power of your faith can change you, change the people around you. We are called not to take on the burdens of the whole world alone, but to gather together and just do something. King reminds us, if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. Start with something small. Buy some chocolate, the non-slavery kind, the pay the women farmers fairly kind of chocolate. You could do that. Simple thing. You're looking for an excuse to buy some divine chocolate as a Unitarian Universalist? Okay. This is how positive change happens. We do a good thing, we do a couple of good things, and now we've got a good habit, and we build on that. And remember, sometimes our best intentions do not go amiss. Sometimes we do as we are meant to. The sun will sometimes melt a field of sorrow that seemed hard frozen. May it happen for you. May love bless you, keep you, and amen.